the End of Life's Values series. This is what we're going to talk about tonight, is the most important of all the values that we have talked about so far. And we have gotten to the very end of the series, and I hadn't given you a test. So tonight I'm going to give you a test. Are you ready? Now this is, you don't want to answer this test out loud, because if you get the wrong answer, you're going to embarrass yourself. Okay? Okay, here's it. You sit down and you have to make this decision. This is a real life setting. All right? I want you to use your sanctified imagination. Okay, are you ready? Okay, say yeah. Okay, all right. You are in a rubber raft with your friend. And the reason that you are in this rubber raft is because y'all were out deep sea fishing and your boat sunk. And on that rubber raft, you got a set of flares. You got enough of food for 5 days if you ration it out right. And you've got 5 gallons of water. And you are out deep sea fishing, and there's no land in sight. There's no other boats in sight. And you cannot make it to land in the amount of time of food and water and flares that you have possibly having to have without throwing at least one thing overboard. So very quickly think, what would you throw overboard first? Okay, if all of you said my friend, we're going to do this study tonight a little more intently. Everybody's in good shape but Mark, and he said Sherry. Oh, you say that. Oh, you didn't even go fishing. Yeah, Bruce should have. Yeah, that's right. Oh, we're going to talk about the value of love tonight. Jesus talked about this value more than he talked about any other segment in all of his studies, in all of his teachings. He alluded to joy and love more than any other thing. He talked about it more than heaven. He talked about it more than he did hell. He talked about loving each other. Values are all about what's important. And this is one of the things that God thought was so important. Jesus was asked what was one of the ultimate value questions by the religious leaders. And the teachers of the law of the Old Testament came and they assembled themselves and said to Jesus, there are a lot of commands from God in the Old Testament. We have the Big Ten, and then we have a lot of other commandments. But you, who claims to be the Son of God, the Messiah, what is the most important of all the commandments? That was a value question. And without any hesitation at all, Jesus' answer was, the most important command is this: love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength. And the second commandment is this: love your neighbor as you love yourself. And then he made this statement: there are no commands more important than these. None, zero, no commandments more important than that. Is that what Jesus said? That must be true then, huh? Yeah, amen. So as we come to the end of this series, I can tell you without any fear of contradiction, the things that we're going to talk about tonight are some of the most important things that you're going to be able to see and to be able to study in all of these value things. As you know, I got on my brand new glasses tonight. And guess what was right in the middle of them? H. Clifton Black thumbprint that looked real good, except I couldn't see by it. And so, Yay. Thought my glasses. I thought I was going blind. So, this is it. This is, Paul said this in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 13. And now, these three remain. He talked about all of the things, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Galatians chapter 5, verse 14 said the whole law is made complete in this one command: love your neighbor as you love yourself. The whole law summed up. The entire law, the entire commands, all of these things are summed up in this one value that God gave us and spoke to us through his word, and that is that we love one another. So, how do you build the kind of love that lasts? Not just in your home, but among your friends. How do you build a kind of love relationship that will last? How do I build a love relationship with Wayne and Melissa, Bruce? You know, how do you do that? And Shirley, and Dale, how do you build a love relationship that lasts? And I'm going to tell you something, guys. It's not easy. Did you know that? You know why? Because we don't always get along. Now, isn't that a surprise? Hello? Yeah, we don't always agree on everything. Isn't that right? Yeah, you might as well go ahead and fess up to it. I know it. And you know I know it. You know? So, there are two simple things I want to talk to you based on what God said to us. First of all, to enjoy genuine love in my life, to enjoy loving people. Now, we're not talking about being loved back. We're talking about loving people. Hello? My responsibility is to love you, not make you love me back. Is that right? Now, all of us want to be loved. All of us want to be liked, but that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to love Brian, not make Brian love me back. Are y'all with that yet? Now, if you don't get this, you're going to miss the whole thing. Because you're going to spin your wheels. If you're going to spend your whole life trying to make people love you, you're going to have a miserable life. Yeah. Amen. So why is it so important for me to say that? Well, because love is one of those things that's misunderstood. I mean, we talk about love all the time, and most of the time, it has nothing to do with what real love is about. For an example, I love Linda. You know, isn't that nice? I love pizza. Man, I really love pizza. You know, I can go to CC's Pizza, son, and I just have to repent before I get out the door. Because I eat every kind of pizza they have. They have chocolate pizza. Yeah. How many have ever been to CC's eat chocolate pizza? Lord Jesus, son, if they ever go to the marriage of the Lamb, I hope they have chocolate pizza. But I'm going to tell you something. If there's not a difference between me loving Linda and loving pizza, I'm in trouble. Isn't that right? You know, but the problem is we only have just one word for love in our language. You know, I love my Harley. But I ain't sleeping with it tonight. You understand? And sometimes I ain't sleeping with Linda either, because there's another room right over there that she invites me to go sleep in every so often. We have so much fun at my house, because sometimes I don't go to sleep when she goes to sleep. And it just kind of aggravates me for her to be over there sleeping, you know. And I feel like that I'm ordained of God to ask her how she's doing. And ever so often I'll say, "Are you already asleep?" Last night was one of those nights. And I didn't just ask her. It was just, I'm pretty sure it wasn't from God. I could just tell you right straight up. But I felt impressed to just punch her right in the side and make sure she was still awake. She was awake after about that long. And then we had a Sunday school lesson. But I'm not teaching it this Sunday. I can tell you right straight up. But anyhow, I won't be asking her tonight if she's asleep. I'll just go snoring with her. That's all. Yeah, she wake up during the night. She said, TV's still on. I said, I know it. I would sound asleep. But there's a way that we deal with love with each other, you know. And I tell people all the time. People ask me a lot, and you've heard me say this. How do you stay married for 54 years to the same person? And I tell them, you have fun together. You laugh at each other. Laugh with each other. Laugh at each other. You know, I laugh at Linda a lot. Sometimes she don't like it, but I do it anyway, you know. And I laugh at me a lot because I'm telling you, I'm pretty funny. You know, I'm telling you the truth. I say some funny things to myself. Yeah, because I like to hear funny things, and I talk to myself sometimes. I tell myself jokes I had never heard. And them folks, they're hilarious. I'm telling you the truth. I can't tell them to you, but man, they funny. I'm telling you. Life for me is fun. Life for me is a party. But the problem is that we don't understand love like we need to. Let me tell you, I think one of the greatest misconceptions about love is that we think love is a feeling. Now listen. Love is not a feeling. It produces feeling. It produces great feelings. I mean, bubbling over hilarious feelings that make you smile when you don't want to, you know. I mean, love produces feelings, but love itself is not a feeling. Love is a choice. You understand what I'm saying? I have to choose to love Shirley, you know. I have to choose to love my wife. I have to choose to every day. Did you know that? You said, well, no, you don't. Sure you do. Listen, I'm going to tell you something. I have to choose to love my wife every day. And she probably has to choose to love me 3 or 4 times a day. You know what I'm saying? I mean, she struggles with this test. I can just tell you right straight up. But the next misconception about love is that it's an uncontrollable. Now, that's just dumb. You know, have you ever heard people say, well, we just fell in love. We didn't mean to. We just fell in love. Well, that's just like kind of walking down the street and didn't mean to. Just fell in a hole. They're going to both feel about the same. You know, when you feel in that hole, you're going to come up hurt sooner or later. And if you just fall in love, I'm going to tell you, you're going to fall out of it. Huh? Love is a process. Isn't it? Love is a process. I love my wife today more than I ever have. We have this little thing. Linda said them all over the house just in case I needed to hear it. I love you more today than I did yesterday, but not as much as I will tomorrow. Yeah, and she's got one on next to my bed where I can look at it ever so often. When I wake up and look at the clock, I think sometimes she puts it between me and the clock where I can look at it, you know. She's trying to tell me something. We got this embroidered thing, I mean, whatever it is, crochet or whatever that stuff is. Cross stitch, yeah, we got one of those on that. Yeah, you ever seen the other side of that? Oh, don't look at the other side of it if you're going to talk about loving somebody, because it is ugly, I'm telling you. But anyhow, love is a process, and you ought to love your wife or your husband more today than you did yesterday. Now, I mean, it's a trying time sometimes. You know what I'm saying? So it's hard sometimes to love your wife or love your husband more today than you did yesterday, especially if they don't cooperate. Hello? Say amen. Yeah. Mark, don't say nothing. You know, just say out. Yeah. You know, I mean, there are circumstances in our life that we don't control. And sometimes it has to do with misunderstandings or some more very serious things that we don't have any control over. Well, then here's the problem. We have been, for an example, and some of you know what I'm talking about, some of you don't, but most of you do. Maybe not this particular situation, but you've been living your life, and every day you have tried your best to love your mate more today than you did yesterday. Isn't that true? Sure. I mean, you if you don't try to, you ought to. You know, you say, well, you ever did it, you don't understand, we're 100 years old. Well, you have to try a little harder. You understand what I'm saying? You may have to talk a little louder. I love you! You want how many? 2. It gets a little more difficult sometimes, you know what I'm saying? And then if there's somebody else comes in the picture, it really gets difficult because all of a sudden, now you've got to change your gears, okay? I mean, you've spent your life with somebody that you have focused on trying to love more today than you did yesterday, and then all of a sudden, they're not in your life anymore. Hello? You know what that's called? An emotional wound. Hello? And it's hard. I'm going to tell you, you listen to what I'm telling you. Emotional wounds is more difficult to heal than a broken leg or broken ankles or broken feet or broken heads. You understand what I'm saying? Emotional wounds are difficult. Why? Because we were geared to love our mates more today than we did yesterday. That's how God geared us up. So love is a process. But here's what I want to talk to you about. Love is a matter of choice. That is, it's controllable. Jesus commanded us to love each other. Now, if we didn't have a choice, he wouldn't have told us to do it. Are you listening to what I'm saying? If I just automatically just looked at Mark and just loved him, you know, then Jesus wouldn't have to tell me to love Mark. You understand what I'm saying? It is a controlled emotion. Love is a controlled emotion. Wow. See, God tells us, notice what he said, Colossians chapter 3, verse 14. Over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together. You know what Paul is saying? You have to put it on. You have to make a conscious choice to love people. You say, well, so? This is the second thing. Are you ready? Love is a matter of conduct. Love has to do with the way we act toward people. Is that right? Yes, sure it is. 1 John chapter 3, verse 18 says, let's stop just saying we love people. Let us really love them and show it by our actions. I can tell Sherry I love her all day long. But if I treat her like a dog, she ain't going to believe I love her at all, does she? Huh? Isn't that right? Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. If I'm going to love you, I'm going to show you I'm going to love you. No, I may not buy you trinkets. I may not buy you jewelry. I would, but I don't have any more money left because I bought all that for my wife. But I don't have to buy you things. That's trying to purchase your love. You understand? I don't have to buy you anything. I don't have to purchase your love. If I love you, it's because I have made a conscious choice to love you. If you never do anything favorable to me or for me. You understand what I'm saying? Wow. The Greeks got a bunch of words that we use for love. One of them is affection. One of them is sexual attraction. One of them is friendship. One of them is unconditional actions of love toward one another. The last word here is what Jesus said. That's this phileo. This the word where the city of Philadelphia got their name from the Greek word phileo. The city of brotherly love. Love is something that we put in action in our life. So how do you do that? Well, it shows up in how we treat people. How we treat people. Let me just I pick on Daphne. I pick on Daphne all the time. Now I'm going to tell you, because I love her. But let me just tell you how much she and Jean love me. when between them and Bruce, listen, I had trouble backing off of the trailer today. You understand? There's a guy in this building, I'm not calling any names, but his initials is Bruce, had trouble riding up and forward. And he gave up the ghost and said, I can't do it. You should have been out there going backwards with me today. You could have prayed for me while Daphne was turning me loose. Yeah, while she was pushing on my ham, trying to get me back on the seat. But an act of love is when I saw today there was a trailer backing in my driveway because they had gone over to Roper's and picked up my bike because they knew I wanted it. And they brought it to me, backed it off, and set it in my carport for me. That's an act of love. You know, you don't have to ask anybody to do things for you, because when you love people, you want to express your love, sometimes in different ways. Okay? So love is a response. So therefore, I want to, if you want to act like love acts, if you want to act like love acts, you say, how do love act? Well, first of all, it's patience. I don't know how that got in there. I think Paul probably was on something when he put that in there. You know, God said in his word through the hand of the Apostle Paul, you want to know what love is, what love does, how love acts. Love is patient with people. Love is patient with people. Some of you aren't real patient with people. You're too much like your preacher. Let me just be honest with you. I don't have a lot of patience. I mean, I just really don't. If it's a virtuous son, I wasn't there that day they handed them suckers out. I can just tell you I missed that one. But I'm working on it. My wife don't think I have any patience. I don't know where she gets that idea. You know, just because I blow my horn. If the light is already, you know, if it's somewhere between red and green, then somebody needs to be moving. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, why would you sit there when you could be moving? You know. Yeah, don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. I know. Yeah, there's some folk in here need to say here that. You know. Listen to what Paul said in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 2. Be humble and be gentle. Be patient with each other. Make allowances for each other's faults because of your love. Make allowances for each other's faults because of your love. Let me ask you a little question. You know anybody that don't have any faults? Me either. I almost did one time, and it was me. And I blew it before I could even get through thinking about it. All of us have faults. All of us make mistakes. Isn't that right? All of us blow it at one time or another. You know what? The people that you love, the friends that you have, the person that you're married to, the people that live in your house, your children, your best friends, your family members, all have faults. Isn't that right? They all stupid sometimes. Aren't they? Yeah. Yeah. Listen, I'm telling you, my kids act just like my wife's people sometimes. And they go see this sermon on YouTube. That's what's so bad. Yeah, but I just saw him last week. I don't have to see him again for another 2 or 3 years. I mean, I forgot about him. When people have faults, you can love them in spite of their faults. That's what love is. You don't just throw them away. You don't just cast them out. Look, your kids are going to be dumb. They're going to make stupid decisions sometimes. You don't just throw them away. You just keep on loving them. You know why? You know why you don't want to throw them away? They probably learned some of it from you know who. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, every once. Yeah, yeah. She'll say your kids act just like you sometimes, and I don't. I actually don't think she was giving me a compliment. You know what I'm saying? She was probably trying to tell me something. So anyhow, love causes us to allow for other people's faults. The second thing is that love is kind. This is I think one of the more difficult things for us to do consistently, and that's to be kind. You say, well, why would you say that? Because I'm going to tell you, sometimes you just don't feel like being kind. Is that right? I mean, sometimes you just don't feel like it. And so if you base these values on your feelings, it's difficult to do. Huh? I mean, sometimes, honestly, I'm just being as honest with you. Sometimes I just don't want to be around anybody. You ever been that way? And you know what I do? I go in there and I get my stuff out and I start doing research and I do sermon work and I do all that kind of stuff. Just I don't have to talk to anybody. And the phone rings, I don't answer it. You know? And if a phone rings and I don't answer it, Linda don't answer it either. Because she knows if it's going to be for me, I'm going to say, I can't believe you did that. Now, some of you thinking, oh, my God, what kind of preacher do we have? I thought he said home was praying for us to call him and tell him how much we need him to pray for us. No, not all the time. I just thought I'd let you know if I know who you are. If I see your name on my TV up there, I'll answer it. I'll say, oh, crap, Mark wants something. But kindness is one of those things that you have to work at. You have to make a decision, a conscious decision, that you're going to be kind to people. And sometimes it's not always easy. Kindness is one of those things that God has given us that offers us the power to change someone's day. Did you get that? Now listen, keep that thought, because kindness is one of those powers that God has given us that could change somebody's life. I sat down today beside a lady. And I put my arm around her and I said, you don't know who I am, do you? She said, no. I said, I'm the pastor at Mountain Grove Church, and I come down here to tell you that I love you. I said, but that's not really why I came to tell you. She said, well, what did you come to tell me? I said, I come to tell you Jesus loves you. And I need to know from the innermost recesses of my heart, have you ever invited Jesus to come into your life, forgive you of your sins, and make you a Christian? And while she was there, in a they're not called exercise rooms, they called something else in the nursing home. While she was pushing her feet up and down, as weak as she was, I had an opportunity for her to tell me that she had invited Jesus into her life, to forgive her of her sins and make her a Christian. And I hugged her and told her I loved her. And I left. She said, well, that's all I had to do. That's all God told me to go down there and do. Because I wasn't supposed to be in there where she was. But I told the guy that was standing guard on the door that I needed to be in there to see that lady. And he stood there to make sure what I had to say. I don't know how many people told her today that they loved her. But I know one thing. She knew today that Jesus loved her. And he wanted her to go to heaven to be with him. You see, now listen carefully. That power of kindness just didn't change her day. It changed her life. You would be amazed at what you can do by being kind to people instead of being a horse's patoot. Hello? Isn't that true? Yeah, amen. Kindness is the power to change a person's life. Love isn't showy. That means that you don't have to impress people by trying to be something that you aren't. Hello? Don't pretend you love me when you don't. Huh? Just pretend you don't see me. That'll be all right. Now, if I think you don't care anything about me and don't want to see me, that's a whole nother story. Because I'm going to catch you at the end of that aisle in Walmart. I guarantee you, son, if I see somebody at Walmart trying to get away from me and Linda sees it, she said, don't you do it. I said, oh, yeah, I'll see you in a minute. Because I can outrun them from this place right here to the end of that Walmart. And when I know they get ready to step on, I'm going to step right out in front of them and say, hey, how you doing? Man, I ain't seen you in a long time. You say, well, I ain't being kind. That's being mean as the devil. No, it's fun. Yeah, you know what the scripture said? Heaping love upon, kindness upon is like heaping hot coals on somebody. Did you know it was in the scripture? Yeah. Yeah. Now I've got to hurry because y'all made me tell too many stories. For is love isn't selfish. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13:5, love is not rude, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. It's not selfish. It doesn't keep a record of wrongs. Did you hear the story about this guy was asking somebody about ask him what thing he most admired about his wife? And he said, well, yeah, I can tell you what I admire her about the most. He said, why? She's a historian. He said, your wife's a historian? He said, did she teach school? He said, no. No, every time we have an argument, she brings up something from the past. Oh, well, that's another whole story. Not selfish. Love isn't selfish. You don't have to have your way. Isn't that right? Yeah, amen. Now, notice what else. It isn't rude. I don't even have to talk about that. I mean, selfishness and rudeness go together. Hello? Five is love doesn't quit. Love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. The word persevere is like a knot, a trap. It's a picture of people on a tug of war. They're all tugging together. They persevere. You say, well, that love doesn't always persevere. But you know why? You know why, because you've heard me tell you this. Because you're trying to do it on a flesh level instead of on a spiritual level. I can't love my wife the way Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I just can't. According to my own flesh, according to my own self, I just can't do it. But if I let Jesus love through me, you understand? He can do it. Yeah, if that's Jesus, tell him I ain't finished yet, but I'm on my way. Tell him I just get to this love part right here. Tell him I'm just getting the mark. I'll be through in a minute. Matthew chapter 22, verse 36 through 39, Jesus said, there are two priorities of love. First of all, love your neighbor as you love yourself. But that's not the first one. The first one is love the Lord your God with all your heart in your soul and your mind and all your strength. You see, I can't love Brian until I'm in love with him. You understand what I'm saying? When I have a sketchy relationship with him, when my intimacy with God is not what it ought to be, if my walk with God is not where it should be, if my relationship with God is not what God intended for it to be, then I have problems loving other people. But if I can love God with all my heart and all my soul and all my mind and all my strength, then I can love Shirley and Rick and Russell and Jean and on and on and on. You understand what I'm saying? You say, well, preacher, what are you saying? Let me just wrap this thing up real quickly right here. If you have trouble loving people, people aren't your problem. Did you hear that? If I have trouble loving Dale, Dale is not my problem. Clifton is my problem. You understand what I'm saying? God commanded me to love him. That's my responsibility. My responsibility. He said, well, what if he hurt you? That's my responsibility, is to forgive him and to love him. Are you listening? That's why we save the best for last. This is the greatest of all the values that God has given us to be able to share, and that is to love people who are unlovable. To love people that we don't even like. Isn't that awesome? You know what that's called? Christianity. You know where it ought to be found? Church. Yeah. Now, you aren't saved because you love people. You just love people because you're saved. Hello? Isn't that good? All right. Well, what a great night. Woo, summer's